In 2009, 3 years before the publication of Petrus Romanus with co-author Cris Putnam, Thomas Horn issued a book titled Apollyon Rising. Between these two books, Horn provided several arguments for why he thinks this year 2012 is a critical one. In this vid, we'll have a look at some of those. Not surprisingly, Horn makes use of the so-called Mayan long count calendar. This artifact has been the subject of numerous end-of-the-world speculations which target December 21st, 2012 as doomsday. But for all the attention it's been given, the Mayan calendar argument has always been a case of making too much of too little. Expert in Mayan records tell us that there really isn't a clear prophecy pointing to the exact year we designate 2012. Horn appeals to an inscription of the designated Monument 6 at Tortuguero. As one of those experts says, Horn also briefly appeals to the occurrence of what is called a galactic alignment, which will take place on December 21st, 2012. The gist of this is that the Sun on that date will align with the galactic plane. Horn says that this is an event that happens only once every 13,000 years. Well, he's off on that a bit, by about a factor of 26,000. The I Ching is an ancient Chinese text as a sort of guide to divination. Horn appeals to the work of Terence McKenna, who allegedly found some sort of pattern in the I Ching which corresponded with spikes in history. Supposedly, for example, there was a spike in the I Ching pattern corresponding with September 11th, 2001. There was also a sudden plunge into nothing around December 21st, 2012. What Horn fails to tell his readers is that McKenna came up with this idea while reading the I Ching, but also while he was under the influence of hallucinogens, which doesn't exactly make for a reliable method of devising an epistemology. Understandably, McKenna's system doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Operating under the assumption that the I Ching is some sort of encoded calendar, the text was used to calculate points of novelty in history. McKenna claimed to have plotted an epoch from 1945, the day of the atomic bomb, to the end of 2012, and points of novelty were alleged to have been discovered from there. There's more than a few problems here. Initially, the highly subjective baseline of novelty is one that can be force-fed onto any chosen event, and that alone makes the system worthless. Another issue is the suspicious choice of 2012 as an endpoint. Other fringe authors at the time McKenna was writing were already speculating about an end-of-the-world date that suits McKenna's sudden plunge at 2012. Next in line from Horn's Fantasy Factory is the WebBot project. Some of this one is that a software program developed in the 90s to track the stock market allegedly took on a mind of its own in 2001 and started making other predictions, such as that a life-altering event would take place within 60 to 90 days of September 11, 2001. It also supposedly predicted the anthrax attacks, the 2004 tsunami, and Hurricane Katrina, and is now predicting global devastation for December 2012. The first problem lies in the vagueness of terms. A life-altering event can be broadly defined, and when you have a 90-day window, it shouldn't be hard to find something which fits that description. In the next 90 days from now, for example, America will hold a presidential election, surely a life-altering event on a significant scale, and also strike one for the webbot. Strike two is incoherence. Check out this sample from the project's own blog, with its predictions for July 31st through August 9th of this past year. Can anyone understand any of that?
Yeah, I can. Makes perfect sense.
Thanks. Strike two. Strike three has to do specifically with 2012, and it relates to how the webbot actually works. The webbot crawls the internet for published data. These days we have a lot of people talking about 2012 as the end of the world. So, not surprisingly, the webbot will predict a correlation between 2012 and the end of the world, precisely because it finds so many people making that connection. It's as self-fulfilling a prophecy as Johnny Carson predicting a toilet paper shortage. Horn also finds signals for 2012 in the fact that a couple of churchmen apparently did some end times calculations reaching to about that year. One of these was a major name, Jonathan Edwards. That's right, Mr. Sinner's in the hands of an angry God himself. The technique is a bit shaky though, as even Edwards had to admit. He started by interpreting Revelation 12:6 as 1,260 years, not days. Then he selected the year 756 AD, because that was the year when temporal power was given to the Pope. Adding 1260 to 756, he reached 2016. Yeah, not 2012. But as Horn explains, that's 3.5 years after 2012, which would fit in nicely the first half of what dispensationalists refer to as the 7-year tribulation period. But is there any reason to select that event in 756 AD as a starting point for any kind of calculation? Not really. No more so than numerous other events one could pick as a starting point. And of course there's also no reason to shift the days of Revelation 12:6 into years, which is simply arbitrary. Here's a quotation from a Jewish mystical work called the Zohar, one which Horn thinks predicts a 2012 end of the world scenario. Now it's far from clear that the year 73 referred to here is 2012 through 13. But what really debunks this appeal is what appears in the Zohar just prior to this alleged prophecy. By the reckoning offered by Horn, this prophecy should have been fulfilled in 2005 or 2006, but unless I missed something, it wasn't. For our next example, we have this reputed prophecy by Cherokee Indian seers, reputedly made around the year 1812. This one posed a special problem which I might not yet have solved, though odds are that I have. I did my best to try to locate the original source of this prophecy to find out if it was an authentic pronouncement of a Cherokee seer in the early 1800s. Well, I couldn't find any reliable academic sources that recorded this alleged prophecy. The best I could do was an astrology website, of all things, that made these claims. Well, 1993 American Indian Quarterly. That ought to be a reliable source for information on this, and it is. But unfortunately, despite this note, it doesn't contain a record of this prophecy, or anything like it. But let's assume that it is real. What would it mean? The same astrology website claimed it would be fulfilled in a rare occurrence called the transit of Venus, in which Venus slides right in front of the Sun from our perspective. That might make some sense, but here's the problem. While this isn't a common phenomenon, it does have a predictable cycle. Stargazers have been observing it for centuries, and the last instances occurred in 1761 and 1769, and 1874 and 1882. It really wouldn't have been that hard for even an amateur stargazer to have calculated that the next one would be in 2004 and 2012. Our last example is the only one I'd say has any serious overtones to it, but at this point not for 2012. Back in 2009, Horn noted that 2012 had the potential to be a bad year for solar storms. Disruptions from the sun that, if strong enough, could conceivably cause a lot of problems for modern electronic devices. But something happened on the way to the solar flare. The experts had some second thoughts about the date. As you can see, there's not a whole lot of substance to Thomas Horn's appeals to 2012, but he and Putnam have one more ace up their sleeves. We'll look at that one in detail next time.